The world watched in awe as the massive Zorthian ship entered Earth's atmosphere. Its size was beyond anything humanity had ever seen. Shaped like an enormous, gleaming silver obelisk, it blotted out the sun as it hung above Earth's skies. The world held its breath as the news broadcasted live coverage from every angle, filling the airwaves with speculation and excitement. For the first time in history, Earth was not alone. The alien ship had arrived. The Zorthians had announced their peaceful intent through a series of cryptic signals, and now their flagship was poised above Earth, hovering like a silent sentinel. The United Nations convened in emergency sessions as leaders from every nation came together to prepare for humanity's first contact with extraterrestrial life. Global tensions, simmering for years, momentarily subsided. Political enemies shook hands, arms were raised in hope, and the promise of a new era seemed within reach. Today we begin a new chapter in human history, the UN Secretary-General declared, his voice resolute yet filled with wonder. We have made contact with beings from beyond the stars. Together, we will share knowledge, explore the unknown, and build a future of intergalactic peace. Yet beneath the optimism and grand speeches, there was a small group of individuals, scientists, engineers, military personnel, who weren't so sure. Dr. Amelia Vance, a renowned astrophysicist, was among them. She paced in her lab, staring up at the massive screen showing live footage of the alien ship, her mind racing. Something wasn't right. She couldn't shake the feeling that this encounter was going to be far more complicated than anyone imagined. Are we really prepared for this? She asked herself aloud, her fingers hovering over a series of data on her computer. For weeks, she and her colleagues had been analyzing the signals the Zorthians had sent, but there was a pattern in their transmission that bothered her, a distortion. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was there. And no one else seemed to notice. Meanwhile, in the war rooms of Earth's military leaders, the anticipation was palpable. Generals and commanders lined the walls, watching the unfolding events with a mixture of awe and calculation. They had been briefed on the potential of the Zorthian technology, faster than light travel, energy shields and weapons capable of devastating entire cities. The thought of alien technology capable of such destruction was both thrilling and terrifying. Yet, there was a certain arrogance in their confidence. The aliens, despite their technological advancements, had made no move to show their strength. No sign of hostile intentions, no demands. In their minds, the world had to be ready to negotiate. But Dr. Vance wasn't convinced. She'd spent her career studying extraterrestrial theories, and her instincts told her that the calm was a facade. The way the Zorthian ship hovered over Earth's major cities, almost in an act of silent observation, gave her chills. What if they weren't here to make peace? What if they were watching, waiting for something? But what? As the world anxiously awaited their first face-to-face meeting, the humans lined up in front of television screens, ready to witness the dawn of a new era. The Zorthians, appearing on the broadcast with their strange, almost metallic features, began speaking in a language that was immediately translated into Earth's major languages. The message was simple, yet filled with an ominous undertone. We come in peace. We offer knowledge, technology, and companionship. We wish to learn from you. It was perfect. It was too perfect. Dr. Vance clenched her fists. In the distance, the Zorthian ship shifted slightly in the sky, as though it was no longer merely observing, but waiting for something. And that's when it happened. A strange hum filled the air, soft at first, then growing louder, a vibration that shook the very core of Earth's technology. Across the world, power grids flickered and blacked out. Communications between nations faltered. It was as though the entire planet had just been thrown into chaos, all at once. The alien ship remained silent, suspended above them, and Dr. Vance knew this was no accident. The storm was beginning, and humanity had no idea what they were about to face. The hum reverberated through the air like an eerie electric pulse, leaving a sense of dread in its wake. For a moment, the world held its breath, unsure of what was happening. Then, all at once, every electronic device on Earth flickered and went silent. Radios, phones, TVs, everything went dead. "What's going on?" The UN Secretary-General muttered, his hand shaking as he glanced at his phone, which had also gone dark. The room of leaders erupted in confusion. In cities across the globe, lights blinked out and computers went black. People began to panic. It felt like the very fabric of civilization had been torn apart in an instant. In the streets, crowds stood frozen, staring up at the hovering Zorthian ship. The air felt thick, almost oppressive, as the temperature in major cities plummeted for a few seconds before returning to normal. It wasn't just a blackout. Something else was happening. Something deliberate. Dr. Amelia Vance was in her lab, too far from the control center to hear the growing chaos, but she wasn't immune to the strange energy pulse that had swept across the globe. Her computer came back online, flickering, as if struggling to regain control. On the screen, a data log of the Zorthian transmissions revealed a sudden shift in the frequency. They weren't just broadcasting peaceful intentions anymore. The pattern was changing, becoming far more erratic. Her heart raced. "This isn't right," she thought. At that moment, an ominous sound filled the air, a low, reverberating hum coming from the alien ship itself. The Zorthian vessel, which had once seemed like a peaceful observer, now seemed like a predator, its massive shape darkening the sky. A massive, sudden burst of energy emanated from its center, crackling across the atmosphere. Then, the first blast hit. From the ship's underbelly, a beam of blinding light shot down toward Earth's surface. It wasn't a weapon, at least not in the conventional sense. The beam struck a remote military base in the Arctic, causing the ground to tremble as the base's infrastructure turned to rubble in seconds. The massive energy beam cut through the Earth like a hot knife through butter, leaving a large crater where a once thriving facility had stood. "Prepare for impact," a military officer shouted in Earth's command center, recognizing the unmistakable pattern of hostile action. Panic flooded the room, and within minutes, the emergency response systems were activated. Nuclear missiles were locked onto the alien ship's coordinates. Humanity's defense had just gone from hopeful diplomacy to full-scale retaliation. Across the globe, chaos spread. Communications remained down, but the world had no time to waste. Governments scrambled to assemble military forces, and civilians poured into shelters. What had started as a moment of potential wonder and discovery quickly shifted into an urgent, existential battle for survival. Dr. Vance, glued to her monitors, frantically typed commands, trying to regain control of the data feeds. The alien vessel seemed untouchable, impervious to Earth's weapons. Whatever technology they possessed, it was far beyond anything humanity had at its disposal. The Zorthians had come with more than just superior firepower. They seemed to manipulate the very energy around them, rendering all human weaponry useless. The response from Earth's military forces, once brimming with confidence, had now turned to desperation. How could they fight a species that could literally control the environment around them? The world's leaders convened via emergency communication lines. The UN Secretary-General's voice was shaking, but he did his best to remain composed. "We need to negotiate. This isn't war, not yet. We must attempt diplomacy, find a way to communicate with them." But it was too late. The Zorthians weren't waiting for a peaceful conversation. They had just fired a warning shot, and Earth was now on the receiving end of their wrath. Just as the world braced for another strike, something unexpected happened. A message from the Zorthian ship appeared on every broadcast screen worldwide. This time, it wasn't a peaceful declaration. The alien leader's voice, cold and emotionless, resonated through every home. "You are unprepared. Your defenses are futile. This is your only warning." The message cut out, leaving a deafening silence in its wake. And then, without another word, the ship's energy pulse flared again. This time much more intense, beginning its path toward Earth's major cities. What had begun as an encounter with visitors had quickly devolved into something far darker. The first blow had been struck. Humanity wasn't just facing an alien civilization. It was facing something far worse. An invader who knew exactly how to break them. The shockwave from the Zorthian attack sent ripples through the atmosphere, shaking the very ground beneath humanity's feet. The moment the energy beam struck, cities trembled, buildings cracked, and the world seemed to hold its breath, as if it feared the inevitable next move. But the attack was only the beginning. As Earth's defenses scrambled to respond, Dr. Amelia Vance was glued to her screens, her mind racing. She had known something was off from the beginning. After the Zorthians' first assault, the global communications blackout had lasted for hours. The Zorthian ship, looming ominously in the sky, hovered like a monstrous eye, watching, waiting for the next move. But as the hours passed, a different signal began to break through. It wasn't military. No, this time, it was a series of encrypted transmissions. Amelia's hands flew over her keyboard. She had been trying to break the alien encryption for days, but this was different. Something clicked in her mind, and a sense of dread crept over her as she began to decrypt the message. It wasn't a message meant for Earth's leaders. It was something deeper. A hidden, coded layer underneath the surface of the signals the Zorthians had been sending. As the last line of code fell into place, the translation came through. Subject Earth. Failure imminent. Humanity's violent nature is incapable of change. The termination of this experiment is necessary. The words hit Amelia like a physical blow. She stared at the screen, unable to comprehend what she was reading. She rechecked the translation, but there was no mistake. The Zorthians hadn't come to Earth for peace or knowledge or cooperation. They hadn't come to offer help. They had come to terminate humanity. Amelia's heart raced as the gravity of the situation began to sink in. The Zorthians weren't just invaders, they were observers. They had been watching humanity for centuries, monitoring Earth's progress, recording its every mistake, every war, every failure. And now, they had deemed humanity unworthy of existence. The very life they had spared was seen as an experiment gone wrong. The Zorthians had seen humanity's history as nothing more than a long string of conflicts and self-destruction. From their superior vantage point, humanity was a primitive species, destined to destroy itself. The signs of war, the violent rise and fall of civilizations, everything humanity had endured, had only confirmed the Zorthians' hypothesis. Earth was a failed experiment. Suddenly, Amelia's screen flickered again, showing a map of Earth. Lines of light surged across the globe, as if the aliens had mapped out their plan. Military installations, critical infrastructure, population centers, everything was marked with precise, deliberate strokes. It wasn't a peaceful survey, it was a countdown. Termination was imminent. Her hands trembled as she sent the decrypted message to the Global Defense Network. The gravity of her discovery was staggering. The world's governments had assumed the Zorthians were here to negotiate, to share knowledge and technology. But what they hadn't known was that the Zorthians had never seen humans as equals, let alone allies. To them, humans were an aberration, a species doomed by its own nature. "Dr. Vance, we need you," a voice crackled over her radio, breaking her thoughts. It was Colonel Armitage, a high-ranking officer from the Earth Defense Coalition. "The Zorthians have begun deploying forces. Their ships are moving toward key military zones, and we don't have the firepower to match them. What are they planning?" Amelia's voice was quiet, but firm as she responded. "They're not planning to negotiate, Colonel. They're planning to wipe us out." A moment of stunned silence passed before Armitage spoke again. "Then we need to fight back, Dr. Vance. We need to stop them before they finish what they started." Amelia glanced at the map on her screen, the red dots marking Earth's cities, the lines of light outlining their impending doom. She swallowed hard. There was no longer any question of diplomacy. Humanity was now locked in a battle for survival against an enemy that had already decided its fate. The aliens were no longer just invaders. They were executioners, and Earth was on the verge of a reckoning. The air was thick with panic as the world realized the true scale of the Zorthian threat. The global communications network remained down, and the military's scramble to regain control of vital systems only deepened the confusion. Major cities remained in chaos, their inhabitants trapped in a sudden state of fear and uncertainty. Yet, amidst the disarray, something remarkable was happening. A unified response. Leaders of nations who had spent decades in conflict began to realize that their survival depended on cooperation. Across the globe, national borders, political ideologies, and long-standing rivalries dissolved in the face of a singular existential threat. No one was immune to the Zorthian onslaught. The invaders had targeted military bases, infrastructure, and civilian centers with ruthless precision. Every country now had a shared goal: humanity's survival. In the underground command centers that once served as emergency hubs for disaster recovery, Earth's generals, scientists, and leaders came together for a single purpose: to form a united front. Major powers set aside their distrust and worked together to piece together what had just occurred. General Lee Garvey, head of the Earth Defense Coalition, stood before a group of military advisors, tapping a map of key Zorthian targets. "We've got a limited window before their forces consolidate. If we're going to have any chance of fighting back, we need to pool all available resources: air and ground forces, tech, and intelligence. We're not just fighting an army. We're facing a species with abilities we can't even comprehend." A Russian officer, Colonel Anya Ivanov, nodded in agreement. "They've demonstrated their power already. Conventional weaponry won't be enough. We have to adapt. Their ships appear to absorb energy, and we know they've disrupted our communications globally. We need to strike at their weak points, whatever they are." Dr. Amelia Vance, her mind still racing from the revelation of the Zorthians' true purpose, stood at the back of the room. She couldn't ignore the sinking feeling in her chest, but the reality was clear. There was no room for hesitation. Humanity had no choice but to fight back, even if they were outmatched technologically. Earth's greatest strength had always been its ability to innovate under pressure. It was time to put that strength to the test. "We have to rely on human ingenuity." Dr. Vance spoke up, her voice calm but resolute. "We've learned from their patterns. There's a weakness in the energy signatures they emit. If we can adapt our existing weapons to disrupt their power systems, it might give us a fighting chance. I've already begun working with some of our best engineers. We'll need every ounce of your trust and cooperation to make this work." General Garvey nodded. "Do it. We need those countermeasures ready before they finish their sweep of the planet." The plan was set in motion almost immediately. Military units scrambled to work with scientists and engineers around the globe, integrating their most cutting-edge technologies with the limited Zorthian tech they had already managed to capture. Human adaptability, the very quality the aliens had underestimated, became the driving force behind the counteroffensive. In every corner of the world, from bustling cities to remote military bases, civilians rallied to support the effort. People volunteered to help in any way they could: hacking, building, assembling, or simply keeping watch. The sight of humans coming together for a common cause, regardless of background or nationality, sent a ripple of hope through the chaos. Humanity was coming alive in a way that the Zorthians hadn't anticipated. It was not just Earth's governments that had united. It was its people. Dr. Vance, working around the clock with teams of engineers and analysts, began refining a weapon designed to interfere with the Zorthian ship's energy field. She theorized that the ship's ability to manipulate energy was both a strength and a vulnerability. If humans could disrupt their energy pulses with a counter-frequency, they might stand a chance of forcing the Zorthians to retreat. As the days passed, the Zorthian attacks continued relentlessly, and the world held its breath as Earth's united forces prepared to take the fight to them. The final moments before humanity's counteroffensive were fraught with tension. Could human ingenuity truly overcome the technological might of an alien species that had watched Earth for centuries? The question echoed in Dr. Vance's mind as she stared at the screen, watching the real-time data streams from the alien vessel above. The world was no longer divided by borders or old grudges. Humanity had one final chance to prove that their greatest weapon wasn't just their technology, but their resolve. And in that moment, Dr. Vance felt something powerful stir within her. A sense of unity, a spark of something much larger than any single person, any single nation. Humanity wasn't going down without a fight. The air was thick with the scent of smoke and tension as Earth's newly unified defense forces prepared for their first major counterattack against the Zorthian invaders. The world, once paralyzed by fear and confusion, was awakening to its true strength. A burning resilience ran through humanity, and it had manifested in the form of a guerrilla resistance that, against all odds, was beginning to challenge the Zorthians' overwhelming technological superiority. General Garvey stood at the front of a command center, his eyes fixed on a digital map that flickered with red dots, marking the positions of Zorthian forces. He could feel the weight of the world's hopes bearing down on him, but his face remained hard and determined. "We may not have their tech, but we have something far more dangerous," he said, his voice steady and low. "We have the element of surprise, and we have the spirit of survival. This isn't going to be easy, but it's our only shot." In the field, the story was the same. Resistance groups had been forming in secret for days, working together under the radar of the alien invaders. Human ingenuity had always thrived in the face of adversity, and this time was no different. With limited resources, people from all walks of life, hackers, engineers, soldiers, civilians, had come together to create makeshift weapons and traps. The Zorthians, despite their superior technology, had vastly underestimated humanity's resourcefulness. In the forests of North America, small bands of rebels worked tirelessly, crafting homemade EMP devices and scavenging for whatever materials they could find. One team, led by an ex-military engineer named Sarah, had managed to strip down a Zorthian drone they'd managed to sabotage during a skirmish, using parts of it to build a crude, but functional, energy disruptor. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. As Sarah stood beside her team, she gripped the device tightly, her face grim with determination. "We hit them hard and fast. No time for hesitation," she said. "We're going to send them a message that they'll never forget." Back in the underground labs, Dr. Vance and a team of engineers were working relentlessly on adapting Earth's technology to combat the Zorthians' superior energy fields. They knew that disrupting the invaders' shields was the key to any major assault. They had begun modifying Earth's most powerful weapon systems to use frequencies that matched the signature of the Zorthians' own energy pulses. It was a long shot. No one knew if it would even work. But as the days passed, it was becoming clear that Earth had no choice but to try. "Every strike we make must count," Vance said as she stood over the console, monitoring the latest series of simulations. "If we can cripple their communications, we can disorient them, buy ourselves enough time to organize a real counteroffensive." The first coordinated attack came at dawn. As Sarah's team moved into position near a Zorthian supply base, they were joined by other resistance groups. People who had once been strangers, but now stood together, united by one goal: to protect their planet. The strike was swift and brutal. Explosions echoed in the distance as EMP devices detonated, cutting off power to the Zorthian drones and their surveillance systems. Within moments, the resistance had taken out several key Zorthian vehicles and disabled their supply chains. The Zorthians retaliated quickly, but humanity's forces were already gone, vanishing back into the shadows, their hit-and-run tactics leaving the invaders disoriented and unprepared. The attacks became more frequent, more daring. Groups scattered across the globe used their knowledge of local terrain to outwit the Zorthians at every turn. From the dense jungles of South America to the urban sprawl of Europe, the resistance adapted and evolved, learning how to strike at the invaders' weakest points while minimizing their own casualties. Despite their superior technology, the Zorthians couldn't seem to get ahead of the humans. Every time they thought they had cornered the resistance, they were blindsided by another wave of unpredictable tactics. Humanity's ability to improvise, to fight with everything they had, began to wear down the Zorthian forces. For the first time since the initial assault, the aliens were starting to lose ground. In the Zorthian command ship, the tension was palpable. The alien leaders, once so confident in their superiority, now began to doubt their initial assessment of humanity. How are they doing this? The Zorthian commander, Threx, demanded of his officers, his voice filled with disbelief. These creatures, they shouldn't be able to fight back like this. They are not following the rules we expected. One of the Zorthian technicians replied. They are unpredictable. Threx clenched his fist. If they want a war, we'll give them one. But we will end this. Back on Earth, the resistance didn't falter. Every victory, no matter how small, fueled the growing fire of defiance. The world's people were coming together, not as nations, but as a single, united species, and they would not let their planet fall. Not today. Humanity wasn't just surviving. They were fighting. And with every victory, they were proving the Zorthians wrong. As the days turned into weeks, the resistance continued to grow. What had begun as a series of sporadic, disorganized attacks soon became a coordinated global effort. Earth's forces, from the underground bunkers of North America to the war-torn streets of Europe, began to learn how to fight the Zorthians, not just with brute force, but with intelligence, resilience, and relentless ingenuity. For the first time since the invasion began, Earth's military commanders and scientists were beginning to see a glimmer of hope. The Zorthian forces, though still formidable, were showing signs of strain. Their communication networks, once impervious, had begun to falter under the pressure of constant guerrilla strikes. Their supply lines were becoming increasingly difficult to maintain, as Earth's resistance forces found ways to sabotage their equipment and disrupt their operations. In an underground command center somewhere in Europe, General Garvey stood before a large digital map of Zorthian positions. His face was grim, but there was a spark of something else in his eyes. Determination. The resistance had been using every trick in the book, hacking into alien systems, creating makeshift weapons, even employing civilians as scouts and saboteurs. The Zorthians had underestimated humanity's ability to adapt, and now they were paying the price. We've hurt them, Garvey said, his voice low but charged with urgency. But we need to hit them harder. We've been reactive. Now it's time to go on the offensive. One of his commanders, Colonel Ivanov, nodded. We've tracked a Zorthian command vessel moving through the South Pacific. If we can take that down, we can cripple their leadership. It's a risk, but it might be our only shot at turning the tide. Garvey looked at the map, his fingers hovering over the coordinates. The South Pacific was a long way from their current position, and the Zorthian defenses there were likely to be tight. But if they could take out the command vessel, it would send a clear message. Humanity was no longer just defending itself. It was fighting back, with everything it had. We need to move quickly, get the intel to Dr. Vance and the tech teams. Let's get ready for the next phase. Meanwhile, in a hidden lab deep in the mountains of South America, Dr. Vance and her team of engineers were working around the clock. The energy disruptor that had been developed from the Zorthian drone was showing promise. The first tests had been promising, but there was no room for error. Every adjustment they made to the frequency had to be perfect. The slightest miscalculation could mean the difference between success and failure. Vance stared at the monitor, watching as her team fine-tuned the disruptor. We have one shot at this, she muttered to herself, her brow furrowed in concentration. If we can disable their main command vessel, we'll have the opportunity to turn the tide of this war. Her mind raced, but she kept her focus. They had studied the Zorthians' energy signatures for weeks. Their shields, their power systems. Everything about their technology was based on one central energy grid. If they could exploit the weak points in that grid, the Zorthians' entire fleet could be brought to its knees. The team had been working with a sense of urgency. Each day brought new challenges as they refined the weapon, each time getting closer to the key they needed to unlock the Zorthians' downfall. But time was running out. The longer they waited, the more damage the invaders could inflict. Back in the field, Sarah's resistance group had gathered more allies. The initial success of their sabotage missions had sparked a chain reaction, with resistance cells now forming in places once thought unassailable. The Zorthians had come to Earth expecting an easy conquest, but they hadn't accounted for humanity's will to survive. Now those forces were unified, fighting not just for survival, but for victory. One night, as Sarah's group prepared for another strike, she stood outside a makeshift command center, staring at the sky. The Zorthian ship was still looming above, but the steady hum of its engines no longer filled her with dread. It was a reminder, yes, of the invaders' might, but it was also a reminder of their growing vulnerability. The longer they stayed, the more Earth's resistance wore them down. "We're not just surviving," Sarah said quietly to her second-in-command. "We're winning. And every day we fight back, we show them what humanity is made of." The sense of unity was undeniable now. Earth wasn't divided by borders, politics, or fear anymore. People from all over the world had come together to defend their planet. It was humanity's final stand, and they were ready to take it. With each new strike, each new victory, the world began to see that the impossible could be done. The Zorthians had underestimated humanity's resilience, and now it was time to make them regret it. The tide was turning, and for the first time in months, hope was beginning to feel like a real possibility. The war for Earth was far from over, but humanity was no longer a species on the brink of extinction. They were a force to be reckoned with. The world had reached a critical juncture. After weeks of relentless skirmishes, sabotage, and guerrilla warfare, humanity was beginning to see the fruits of their hard-won victories. But as General Garvey looked out over the battlefield reports from multiple fronts, the stakes had never been higher. The Zorthians, though battered, were still a formidable foe, and every step forward for humanity had been met with harsh retaliation. Yet there was something different in the air now. An undeniable shift. The Zorthians were no longer the calm, calculated invaders they had once been. They were frustrated, panicked even. "We've pushed them to the edge," Garvey said as he met with his top commanders in a covert military facility beneath the Andes Mountains. "They're regrouping, and we need to be ready. They know we're coming for them." Colonel Ivanov, who had grown more confident in recent days, nodded. "Their command vessel is vulnerable. Our spies report that it's isolated now, with less support. If we strike now, we have a real chance at crippling them." Garvey looked at the map once more. The Zorthian command ship was no longer deep inside enemy territory. It had been drawn out into the open, where human forces had managed to cut off its usual routes of resupply. Its shield was weakened, and there was an opening, a faint crack in the otherwise impenetrable Zorthian defense. "This is it. We have one shot at this," Garvey said, his voice steely with resolve. "Prepare all strike teams. We'll take their command vessel down or die trying." Meanwhile, in a high-tech lab deep within the heart of Europe, Dr. Vance was overseeing the final calibration of the energy disruptor. They had been working tirelessly, refining the device that would give them the best chance of disabling the Zorthian fleet. The weapon was ready, but the question that remained was whether it would work. They had only one shot at this. There was no room for error. "Is the frequency stabilized?" Dr. Vance asked one of the engineers, her gaze fixed on the monitor displaying wave patterns. The engineer looked up from his station, sweat dripping from his brow. "Yes, Dr. Vance. The disruptor should be able to lock onto the Zorthian vessel's power grid. It's as close as we can get to a perfect match." Dr. Vance's mind raced. They had been given the opportunity to hit the heart of the Zorthian war machine, but the cost would be high. If the disruptor failed, Earth's chances of winning this war would be slim. But if it succeeded, they could cripple the Zorthian fleet and turn the tide in humanity's favor. "This is it," Dr. Vance said, more to herself than to anyone in the room. "Everything we've worked for, everything we've sacrificed, comes down to this moment." Back in the field, Sarah and her resistance group were preparing for their final assault. The plan was simple: use the element of surprise to board the Zorthian command vessel, while Earth's forces distracted their main fleet. The key to success lay in their ability to infiltrate the vessel's vulnerable access points before reinforcements arrived. "We strike at dawn," Sarah said, rallying her team. "We've hit them where it hurts before, but this time, we take their heart. We fight for our future, for every life on this planet." As the sun began to rise over the horizon, a quiet determination settled over the resistance group. They knew the odds were stacked against them, but they were no longer the underdogs they had once been. They had the knowledge, the technology, and the will to take down the alien invaders once and for all. The assault teams, led by Colonel Ivanov's military division, began to move into position, while Sarah's group stealthily infiltrated the command vessel's perimeter. The Zorthians, caught off guard by the speed and precision of the attack, scrambled to react. But they were too late. The human teams breached the outer defenses of the command ship, cutting through layers of alien security with their makeshift EMP weapons and hacking tools. Every step was a calculated risk, but the resistance pressed forward with relentless determination. Simultaneously, in Dr. Vance's lab, the final systems check on the energy disruptor was completed. The weapon, aimed directly at the Zorthian fleet, was ready to fire. With a single command, Dr. Vance activated it. A pulse of high-frequency energy shot out toward the vulnerable command ship, reverberating through the airwaves and cutting through the Zorthians' power grid like a knife through butter. The Zorthians' shields flickered. Their communications went dark. The entire fleet, once invincible, was paralyzed. The tide had shifted. As the resistance pushed deeper into the heart of the Zorthian vessel, human forces began to rally. The Zorthians had underestimated the resilience and resourcefulness of humanity. What had started as an alien invasion had become a war for survival. And now, for the first time, Earth had the upper hand. The command ship, now crippled, could no longer respond to the assault. The world watched in awe as the impossible became reality. Humanity wasn't just fighting back anymore. They were winning. The tide of battle had turned irrevocably. The Zorthian fleet, once poised to crush humanity beneath its heel, was in disarray. The energy disruptor had delivered a decisive blow, and the Zorthian command ship, crippled and vulnerable, drifted helplessly in space. The power grid was down, their shields useless, and communication had been severed. The resistance, once scattered and outgunned, was now emboldened, pushing forward with unrelenting resolve. Back on Earth, General Garvey stood before a large holographic map, his eyes scanning the real-time data. The Zorthians, caught off guard by the effectiveness of the strike, were in retreat. It wasn't just a battle they had won. It was a war, and they were on the verge of finishing it. "We've got them on the ropes," Garvey said, his voice calm but full of authority. "We push now. All forces converge on the command vessel. No mercy. We end this today." Colonel Ivanov, standing beside him, nodded. "It's time to finish what we started." Meanwhile, Sarah and her team were inside the Zorthian command ship, navigating its sprawling alien corridors. They had breached the outer defenses, but now they faced the heart of the Zorthian war machine. The bridge was ahead, just one last obstacle standing between them and the end of the conflict. "Stay sharp," Sarah whispered to her team, motioning for them to take their positions. "This is it. We take out their leadership, and it's over." The resistance fighters moved with precision, utilizing the same guerrilla tactics that had carried them through the war. Each step was calculated, every move strategic. The once imposing Zorthian presence was crumbling, their empire unraveling at the hands of those they had underestimated. As they approached the bridge, a sudden, chilling realization struck Sarah. The Zorthian commander, Threx, was still alive, and he was waiting for them. Threx, the alien leader who had orchestrated the invasion, stood before them, his eyes blazing with rage and disbelief. "You should have never fought back," he hissed, his voice cold and venomous. "You have no idea what you're up against. You think you've won. You've only delayed the inevitable." Sarah's team bristled with anger, but she stepped forward, her face set in grim determination. "We've fought for our homes, our families, our planet, and now we're taking it back." With that, the battle erupted. The Zorthians, though weakened, fought fiercely to protect their last stronghold. But they were outmatched. The resistance had the element of surprise and overwhelming numbers. With every move, humanity demonstrated its resilience, its refusal to give in, to succumb to invaders who had no understanding of the power of human spirit. Outside, Garvey's forces, led by Ivanov, moved in on the crippled command ship. Every military asset humanity had managed to assemble in these final moments of the war converged on the alien vessel, preparing to finish the fight once and for all. It was a final, coordinated assault, and the Zorthians had no way of stopping it. For the final push from Sarah's team, the resistance overwhelmed Threx's guards and cornered the alien commander. But just as they were about to strike the fatal blow, Threx, with his last ounce of strength, activated the ship's self-destruct mechanism. A countdown began. "No," Sarah shouted, realizing the threat. In a desperate race against time, Sarah and her team fought their way through the alien vessel to the control room. They knew the Zorthians had one last trick up their sleeves. With seconds to spare, they reached the console, scrambling to disable the self-destruct sequence. Dr. Vance, who had been monitoring the situation from Earth, made the final call. "Override the system now," she shouted, her voice filled with urgency. Sarah's hand trembled as she input the command. And then, silence. The countdown stopped. For a moment, it was as if the world stood still. Then the vessel's lights flickered one last time, and the Zorthians, no longer able to fight back, realized they had lost. The leadership was gone. Their command ship was no more than a broken shell of technology, incapable of further destruction. The world had survived, and humanity had triumphed. As Garvey's forces secured the wreckage of the Zorthian ship, word began to spread. Earth had won. Against all odds, against every expectation, humanity had fought back. The alien invaders, who had once believed their victory was inevitable, had been outsmarted, outmaneuvered, and ultimately defeated by the very species they had considered beneath them. And in the days that followed, as humanity celebrated their hard-fought victory, one thing became clear. Earth had been changed forever. The war had united nations, strengthened resolve, and forged a bond between people that no force could ever break. Humanity had faced extinction, but instead they had found something much more powerful: the indomitable will to survive and fight for their future. The Zorthians were gone, and Earth stood victorious. The final stand had been won, and it was only the beginning of a new chapter for humanity.